The first omen wasn't the meteor. It was the silence. A dead second in the Voxnet where every prayer stuttered, where the planet's orbitals lost their chant of machine logic, where even the Adeptus Mechanicus, those who believed the universe could be reduced to sacred mathematics, paused as if the equation itself had become afraid of its answer. Above Hydra's prime, reality tore like wet parchment. A wound opened in the void, and something fell through, not a ship, not a pod, not a weapon signature the Imperium recognized. It came down wrapped in impossible light, trailing a tail of fire that looked like a seraph's sword dragged across the heavens. Billions looked up. And in that moment, the Imperium did what it always does when confronted with the unknown. It reached for the gun. It reached for the scripture. And it reached for the knife. Because the Imperium can endure hunger, plague, invasion, 10,000 years of horror held together by faith and fear. But it cannot endure a question. Not the real kind. Not the kind that arrives from the sky and whispers, "What if the Emperor is not the only God the universe can make? What if salvation does not wear the Imperium's chains? What if hope is real?" The meteor struck the ash plains beyond Hivespire Hestaran, and when the first soldiers reached the crater, they found no corpse. They found a child, unburned, unbroken, eyes open in the soot like two calm stars. He didn't cry, he didn't scream. He just stared up at the sky he had fallen from, as if listening to a song only he could hear. The commander raised his las pistol anyway, because in the 41st millennium, innocence is not proof of purity. It's bait. And somewhere, far beyond Hydra's prime, far beyond the Astronomican's reach, something ancient and hungry felt the shift in the currents of fate. A new force had entered the long war. Not a Primarch, not a saint, a stranger, a man who could lift mountains, who would soon learn that in the Imperium of Man, the heaviest thing in the galaxy isn't a cathedral or a titan. It's a crown made of belief. And belief, in this universe, kills.
Hydra's prime was not a world that believed in miracles. It believed in procedures. Every sunrise was counted by administratum clerks who had never seen the sky from the surface. Every breath was taxed in labor hours. Every citizen was born with a number, worked beneath a number, and died as a number, processed into the planet's endless engines of war. So when the void split above the planet like a fresh scar, the first response wasn't awe. It was protocol. Orbital augurs screamed. Station shrines flashed red. Navy pickets rotated into firing arcs with the smooth obedience of machines that had been trained to fear surprise more than death. Across Hivespire Hestaran, Voxcasters blared the same prayer in 1,000 dialects, translating panic into something the Imperium could manage. Faith with instructions. "Unidentified atmospheric intrusion," droned a mechanized voice, its cadence half hymn, half machine. All citizens return to assigned shelters. Failure to comply is heresy. Praise the God Emperor. Billions obeyed because obedience was survival. But there are always a few who look up. They saw a streak of impossible brilliance burning through the planet's chemical haze. Not the green flare of orc debris, not the dirty fall of a failed Imperial freighter, not the knife-white flash of a lance strike. This was different. Clean, almost sacred. Like the sky itself had been opened by a blade of light. A meteor, they told themselves. A sign, whispered the desperate. A weapon, decided the authorities. On the ash plains beyond the hive, where manufactorum smoke fell as black snow and the earth was cracked by decades of strip mining, Imperial Guard armored columns rolled out under the banner of the Astra Militarum. At their head came a Vox officer reading litanies from a data slate with shaking hands, and behind him, a commissar whose face was carved into the familiar expression of the Imperium. Suspicion polished into certainty. They reached the impact site at dusk. The crater was wrong. Not the size. The Imperium had seen impacts that could crack continents, not the heat. Hydra's prime was a furnace world in places, and men learned to endure. It was the shape of it. The ash melted into glass in patterns that looked like spirals, like a fingerprint pressed into the world by something that didn't follow natural law. The ground, still smoking, seemed to hum. The commissar ordered a cordon. The guardsmen obeyed. But even behind their rebreathers, they tasted the air and found it clean. That alone felt blasphemous on Hydra's prime. A squad advanced. Auspexes swept. No radiation spike, no chemical signature, no obvious wreckage. Just a faint, steady pulse, like a heartbeat. Then one soldier saw movement and froze. At the crater's center lay a shape in the soot. Small, human, a child. The squad sergeant lifted his laser gun, finger tightening as training replaced thought. The commissar stepped forward, boots crunching on glass, coat snapping in the wind like a flag of condemnation. His bolt pistol was already in his hand, as if the gun were a natural extension of his faith. "In the name of the Emperor," he said, voice flat. "Identify." The child didn't respond. He was maybe an infant, if one could judge age by size alone. His skin was unburned. His clothing was strange, not woven like imperial fabric, not armored like void suit plating. It clung to him like a second skin, dark and seamless. On his chest, half buried in ash, was a symbol that meant nothing to any imperial scripture. His eyes opened. Calm, not glassy or afraid. Calm like deep water. The commissar felt something cold crawl up his spine. Not fear, he would have named it something else. A lack of category. The Imperium could not tolerate what it could not label. "Mutant?" the sergeant muttered. "No," the commissar snapped, too fast. He didn't know. That was the problem. The child looked at them, and for a moment, the men in that crater, hardened by conscription, by war, by the slow brutalization of the Imperium, felt something they hadn't felt since childhood. The instinct to lower the weapon. Then a Vox signal crackled in their ears. "Containment team en route," said a voice layered with machine filtering. "Stand by for Magos retrieval. Do not touch the object. Do not breathe unfiltered air. Do not speak unsanctioned prayers." The commissar's jaw tightened. Adeptus Mechanicus. Of course they would come. The Mechanicus always came when something fell from the sky. To them, the universe was a junkyard of sacred artifacts waiting to be claimed. But the commissar also knew what came after the Mechanicus. The Inquisition. If this child was a witch, he would be burned. If he was a mutant, he would be culled. If he was Xenos, he would be dissected. And if he was something worse, something that could disrupt the Imperium's fragile logic, then Hydra's prime might disappear from Imperial record with a single stamp. The child made a sound then. Not a cry, a soft exhale like a sigh. And the ash around him shifted, not blown by wind, moved gently by something that felt like invisible hands. The nearest guardsman stumbled back, eyes wide. The sergeant's laser gun trembled. "Emperor, preserve us," someone whispered. The commissar raised his bolt pistol again, because he could feel it now, the creeping edge of belief taking shape. Men in the Imperium would rather worship a mystery than admit they didn't understand it. "Contain it," he ordered. "Now." But before they could step forward, the child turned his head toward the horizon, toward the hive spires, toward the distant glow of humanity's prison cathedral, as if he heard something calling him, as if he already knew where he had landed. And somewhere above, unseen behind the cloud-choked sky, Hydra's Prime's defense lasers recalibrated. Because the planet's machine spirit had also noticed what the humans had not. This wasn't a child that had survived an impact. This was a child that the impact had failed to harm. There is a difference, and that difference changes everything. They did not take him to a nursery. Hydra's Prime did not have nurseries, not in the way old Terran myths described them. It had incubation blocks for the labor caste and scolodormitories for the useful and the dangerous. Childhood here was brief, like a candle in a factory draft. The child from the crater was too valuable, too uncertain, too impossible to be handed to common systems. So the Imperium did what it always does with anomalies. It put them behind locked doors and called it sanctuary. In the days that followed, official reports described the incident as a minor orbital debris event. Civilian witnesses were disappeared into administratum processing centers. Guardsmen who spoke too freely were reassigned to penal battalions. The crater itself was sealed under Mechanicus quarantine markers, stamped with red WOW and binary prayer strips. And the child was transported under night cover to a facility that did not officially exist. Mechanicus' adjacent research annex nested beneath a chapel of the ecclesiarchy, because even the tech priests understood that some secrets needed holy walls. He was given a designation before he was given a name. Specimen, KL. Origin, unknown. Threat index, undetermined. Disposition, observe. The Magos assigned to him, Tech Magos Halix, looked at the infant through lenses that could see heat, radiation, chemical composition, even the faint electromagnetic signatures of living tissue. Halix saw bones denser than ceramite, cells that drank light like fuel, a heartbeat steady enough to shame a cogitator. "Fascinating," the Magos hissed through a Vox grill. "He is optimized." The ecclesiarchy overseer disagreed. Cardinal Deacon Voss, a heavy-set man wrapped in incense and authority, watched the child with the wary disgust reserved for anything that threatened to be holy in the wrong way. "This is a test," Voss declared. "A deception. The Emperor alone is divine. Any other miracle is heresy wearing a new mask." Halix's mechadendrites clicked. Divinity is irrelevant. His composition is non-baseline. Potential applications are extensive. The argument became routine. Mechanicus wanted to understand him. Ecclesiarchy wanted to frame him. The Astra Militarum wanted to weaponize him. And somewhere above all of them, invisible but inevitable, the Inquisition's interest sharpened like a blade drawn slowly from its sheath. But the child did not behave like a specimen. He watched. As he grew, from infant to toddler to boy, his gaze stayed unsettlingly calm. He learned language quickly, as if words were just another system to decode. The facility's staff told themselves it was training, that the boy was absorbing indoctrination like any imperial youth. But Halix noticed something else. The boy did not learn the catechisms with fear. He learned them the way one might learn history. As if he were listening to a story people told themselves so they could survive. They tested him, carefully at first. Needles broke against his skin. Scalpels dulled. When they tried heat, he didn't blister. When they tried toxins, his body filtered them as if offended by their simplicity. When Helix increased the gravitational load in a sealed chamber to see if the boy's bones would fracture, the boy simply stood there, shoulders tightening slightly, eyes narrowing, not in pain, but in effort. Then the chamber's reinforced floor cracked. The boy looked down, surprised, as if he hadn't meant to. "I'm sorry," he said. The apology hit Helix harder than the cracked metal. Imperial children did not apologize. They confessed. They begged. They recited. Apology implied choice. Choice implied a soul that wasn't owned. That night, Cardinal Deacon Voss demanded the boy be transferred to the Schola Progenium for proper conditioning. Helix refused, citing Mechanicus jurisdiction over unidentified technological phenomena. The dispute ended when the facility's chapel bells rang. An emergency peal that meant only one thing. The Inquisition had arrived. She entered without announcement because the Inquisition did not request permission. Inquisitor Cardinal Virain wore an ornate mask of gold and ceramite, half saint, half executioner. Her rosette was visible only briefly, just long enough for everyone in the room to remember how small they were. Her eyes found the boy immediately. He was perhaps 8 now, small for Hydra's Prime's starved population, but standing with a posture that felt centered. He met her gaze without flinching, and the room tightened around that moment like a noose. Virain spoke softly. "Do you know who I am?" The boy considered. "Someone important." "Important enough to decide whether you live," Virain replied. The boy's expression didn't change. Not arrogance, not bravado, just steadiness. "Then you should decide. Carefully," he said, "because I don't want to hurt anyone." A hiss of shock ran through the priests and tech adepts. The sheer presumption of that sentence, "I don't want to hurt anyone," felt alien in the Imperium. Here, violence was sacrament. Mercy was suspicious. Virain stepped closer. "Do you dream?" she asked. The boy hesitated. "Yes. What do you dream of?" He swallowed. For the first time, fear flickered. Brief, human, real. "A burning world," he whispered. "A man and a woman. They're far away. And there's a symbol, like a promise." Helix's lenses whirred. Kryptonian memory, encoded trauma. A past life. Virain's fingers tightened on her rosary, each bead a skull. "A past," she murmured. "That is not the Emperor's." She turned to Helix. "This being cannot be allowed to become a legend. Legends become religions. Religions become rebellions." Helix dared to speak. "If he is loyal, loyalty is not a feeling," Virain cut in. "It is a leash, and I see no leash." The boy listened. He understood more than they realized. He looked past Virain, through the facility's thick viewports toward the smogged sky. Somewhere beyond that choking cloud cover, the sun of Hydra's Prime burned. A pale, sickly star compared to old Terra's myths. Yet the boy felt stronger when it rose. He didn't know why. He only knew that light made the world clearer. They gave him a name soon after, not out of kindness, but necessity. Names made things easier to command. They chose an imperial name. Simple, strong, forgettable. Cal. The boy accepted it politely. But sometimes, when no one was listening, he traced the strange symbol they'd taken from his clothing on the dust of his cell wall. And he whispered a second name under his breath. A name that sounded like falling starlight. A name the Imperium would never approve. Hydra's Prime didn't wait for prophecies to become true. It manufactured truth through force. The Tyranids arrived 3 years after Cal's designation became a sealed file in an Inquisitor's vault. The first signs were subtle. Missing void traffic, astropathic screams, a taste of copper in the mouths of sanctioned psychers. Then came the shadow in the outer system, blotting auger arrays like a bruise spreading beneath skin. Hive fleet splinters, enough to doom a world that was already dying by inches. The planetary governor called for reinforcements. The Astra Militarum mobilized. The Navy's void ships formed lines that looked brave on maps and fragile in reality. The Ecclesiarchy declared a season of fasting that killed tens of thousands before the first bioship even entered low orbit. And beneath a chapel that was also a laboratory, a 12-year-old boy named Cal listened to the alarms and realized something that made his stomach twist. They were going to let people die. Not because they were evil, though the Imperium did not fear evil as much as it feared disorder. They were going to let people die because death was manageable. It fit the system. Cal had been raised in confinement, trained in doctrine, shown sanctioned images of the Emperor enthroned in eternal sacrifice. He understood the language of duty and the logic of survival. He even understood violence. Hydra's Prime taught violence the way other worlds taught arithmetic. But he did not understand surrender. Not in the quiet moral place inside him, where something older than the Imperium still breathed. The first wave hit the hive outskirts under cover of spore clouds. Bioforms poured through ash wastes and drainage channels like living knives. Imperial guardsmen died in trenches, laser guns carving bright lines through the dark, only to be swallowed by chitin and hunger. In Hive Spire Hesterin, a hab block collapsed under the impact of a Tyranid artillery organism, an obscene thing that launched bone spears the size of tanks. Hundreds of civilians were buried in seconds, their screams lost beneath the city's constant industrial roar. Cal heard it, not through Vox, through something else, a vibration in the air, a pressure in his bones, a sense that suffering had weight, and the world was tipping under it. He stood in his cell, hands clenched, staring at the sealed door. The warding rooms and machine locks were designed to resist sabotage, not to contain a being who could crack metal by accident. He didn't want to become a weapon. But he couldn't sit still while people died above him like ash falling from a furnace. So he did the one thing the Imperium never forgives. He disobeyed. The door buckled outward with a groan. Alarm screamed. Servitors turned their heads with insect precision, tracking him. Skitarii guards raised galvanic rifles, and their shots struck his chest and fell away as sparks. Cal's eyes widened, not in anger, in realization. He began, then stopped, because there was no time to explain. He ran, the corridors blurred. He moved faster than anyone in the facility could process. He wasn't trying to be invisible. He simply wasn't thinking about being seen. He burst up through the chapel floor, stone cracking like brittle shell, and emerged into incense smoke and panicked priests. They recoiled, as if a demon had crawled from the altar. Cal didn't stop to argue theology. He looked up. Above the hive spires, Tyranid gargoyles swarmed, bat-winged horrors that turned the air into a living storm. A winged bioform the size of a gunship, some obscene cousin of a hive tyrant, spiraled downward toward a transport full of evacuees. Cal's body moved before his fear could. He leapt. Not a jump, a launch. He tore through the chapel roof in a burst of stone and light, rising into the toxic air like a bullet fired by God. For a heartbeat, he panicked. There was nothing under him, only sky and distance. Then instinct rewrote physics. His arms shifted, his body angled, and the air caught him as if it had always been waiting to obey. He flew. The sight stopped men in trenches mid-trigger pull. Guardsmen stared up through smoke and spores and saw a boy streak across the sky trailing a contrail of pale light. Ecclesiarchy priests fell to their knees, mouths open, words failing them. The transport was seconds from being torn open when Cal reached it. He slammed into the winged Tyrannid in midair with a force that cracked chitin like brittle glass. They spun through the air, tumbling, and Cal felt claws rake his skin. Felt, for the first time, pain that wasn't physical so much as wrongness. Like reality itself protested the creature's existence. He drove it down. They hit a manufactorum platform in an explosion of debris and ichor. The Tyrannid shrieked, thrashing, jaws snapping for his throat. Cal grabbed its mandibles and pulled. The creature's head tore free with a wet sound that made hardened soldiers vomit. Cal stood over the corpse, chest heaving, hands slick with alien blood. He looked around and saw humans staring at him, some terrified, some awestruck, some already forming the shape of worship in their eyes. He wanted to say, "I'm just trying to help." But the Imperium didn't hear that kind of sentence cleanly. Behind him, a commissar raised a bolt pistol, torn between duty and disbelief. And far above, in the shadowed safety of a command spire, Inquisitor Cardinal Virain watched the feed come in. Her mask did not move, but her voice turned cold. "So," she whispered, "the miracle has revealed itself." On a tactical display, casualty numbers slowed for the first time since the invasion began. Not because the Imperium's guns had improved, but because a single boy was moving through the battle like a force of nature. 3 hive ships in low orbit shifted their vector, reacting like predators, noticing a new threat. And somewhere deeper, behind the Tyrannids, behind the war, behind the thin skin of reality, the warp stirred. Because something had just happened that the galaxy understood instinctively. A symbol had been born. And in Warhammer 40,000, symbols do not remain symbols for long. They become banners. They become knives. They become gods. The Imperium of Man did not panic. It never did. Panic was a civilian luxury. Panic was what happened before doctrine took over. Once the first miracle was witnessed, once the casualty numbers dipped, once Vox feeds captured a boy tearing a Tyrannid apart with his bare hands, the Imperium did what it had done for 10,000 years. It categorized. Within minutes of Cal's emergence, the battle zone around Hive Spire Hesterin was sealed under inquisitorial authority. The official designation changed 3 times in a single hour. Asset. Anomaly. Potential heretic vector. Each word carried a different fate. Inquisitor Cardinal Virain watched the data scrolls cascade across her private, hololithic array as Hydra's prime burned below. The Tyrannid assault had slowed, not stopped, but bent. Like a river diverted by a stone too heavy to move. Cal was that stone. She studied the recordings again. The slow-motion frame where the boy, no, the man now, grown far too quickly, stood amid the wreckage, light bleeding from him like a wound in the dark. Guardsmen froze. Civilians knelt. One priest tried to raise a hymn before being dragged away by commissariat troops. That moment concerned her more than the violence. Violence was normal. Hope was not. "Pull every record," Virain ordered. "Birth registries, Mechanicus biometrics, astropathic echoes. I want his absence mapped as carefully as his presence." Her acolytes moved instantly. Servo skulls flitted like pale insects, data streams pouring into the chamber. The air smelled of incense and ozone, faith and function colliding in the Inquisition's preferred equilibrium. Psychic signature? Virain asked. Unclear, replied Savant Lexico Mar, his voice trembling despite decades of conditioning. No warp flare on manifestation. No demonic resonance. No sanctioned psyker equivalents. He registers like a blind spot. Virain's fingers tightened. A blind spot in the warp was not a comfort. It was an offense. Most beings in the galaxy left ripples in the immaterium, emotions, fears, desires echoing in that screaming reflection of reality. Even blanks had a presence, a negative gravity that repelled the warp. Cal was different. He was quiet, as if the universe itself was holding its breath around him. Magic? She asked. Mar hesitated. If we define magic as warp-mediated causality, then no. His actions violate expected physical thresholds without corresponding warp displacement. The room fell silent. That was worse. The Imperium knew how to deal with witches. Psykers could be chained, burned, fed to the Golden Throne. Demons could be banished. Chaos could be fought endlessly if necessary. But something that did not use the warp? That was a loophole in the universe. Virain stood and approached the viewport. Below, Hydra's prime burned in its familiar way, factories collapsing, hive towers aflame, billions dying anonymously. Yet, now, threading through the chaos, were reports of impossible survivals. Collapsed hab blocks lifted. Evacuation convoys shielded from bioplasma by a single flying figure. Tyrannid organisms avoiding one sector entirely, as if instinct warned them away. The galaxy had noticed. So had the warp. Astropaths across 3 nearby systems had begun screaming of a sun walking among the dead. Chaos cult cells, long dormant, had erupted into frenzied worship, convinced the end times had arrived. And that was the final nail. When chaos celebrates something, the Inquisition sharpens its knives. Bring him in, Virain said quietly. A pause. Alive, she added, if possible. Cal did not resist capture. That disturbed them almost as much as if he had. A dozen Valkyries descended through smoke and fire, escorted by gunships and psychic null wards. Inquisitorial stormtroopers fanned out in perfect formation, weapons locked, minds sealed by indoctrination and prayer. Cal hovered above the battlefield when they approached. He could hear their hearts, their fear, their certainty. Cal of Hydra's Prime, Virain's voice boomed from the lead craft. By the authority of the Holy Ordos, you are ordered to submit to examination. Cal looked down at the burning city. I was helping, he said. It wasn't defiance. It was confusion. You disrupted the Emperor's order, Virain replied. That alone demands explanation. Cal lowered himself slowly, hands open. If there's a better way to save them, he said, tell me. No one answered. Because in the Imperium of Man, saving everyone was not a recognized objective. Restraint fields snapped into place, layered with psychic dampeners that Cal barely felt. He allowed himself to be shackled, not because they could hold him, but because breaking them would confirm every fear they already had. As the Valkyrie lifted off, Cal watched Hydra's Prime shrink beneath him. For the first time since he arrived in this universe, he felt something close to doubt. Not in himself, in them. The chamber where they questioned Cal had been designed to interrogate saints. That was not hyperbole. Its walls were lined with reliquaries containing fragments of martyrs who had once claimed visions, miracles, or divine mandate. Some had been canonized. Most had been executed. The distinction, Cal would soon learn, depended less on truth than on utility. He stood at the center of a sigil-inscribed floor, hands unbound, restraints withdrawn. Viraine wanted to see what he would do unleashed. She entered alone. No retinue, no weapons drawn. Only her mask, her rosette, and the accumulated authority of countless exterminated worlds. "Do you know why you're here?" she asked. Cal met her gaze. "Because I helped when I wasn't supposed to." Viraine studied him. "No," she said. "You're here because you did not ask permission." She circled him slowly. Servo skulls tracked her movement, recording every micro-expression, every fluctuation in Cal's body heat and heart rate. "You could have fled," she continued. "You could have ruled. You could have demanded worship." Cal frowned. "Why would I do that?" That, more than anything, unsettled her. "Because that is what power does," Viraine replied. "Power accumulates. Power centralizes. Power demands recognition." "Then it isn't power," Cal said quietly. "It's fear wearing armor." Silence. Somewhere deep in the facility, a bell chimed the hour. The sound echoed like a funeral note. Viraine stopped in front of him. "Let me ask you the only question that matters," she said. "And understand this. Entire civilizations have died on the answer." She leaned closer. "Do you believe the Emperor of Mankind is a god?" Cal hesitated. Not because he feared the answer, because he understood the weight of belief. "I believe," he said slowly, "that he's suffering." The chamber reacted as if struck. Alarms did not sound. Weapons did not fire, but the warp stirred, faintly, angrily, like a sea disturbed by a stone thrown too gently to justify the waves that followed. Viraine's voice was very calm. "That is not what I asked." Cal met her gaze. "I know." She turned away, pacing now. "You speak of compassion," she said. "But compassion without hierarchy breeds chaos. The Imperium survives because it accepts sacrifice." "I don't," Cal replied. "And that," Viraine snapped, turning back, "is why you are dangerous." She activated the chamber's psychic augurs. Invisible pressure washed over Cal, sorcerous, invasive, wrong. He staggered, not from pain, but from the sensation of being pulled sideways into something that wanted him broken down into meaning. The warp was touching him, and it did not like what it found. Cal gritted his teeth, muscles tensing. The pressure intensified, visions flickering at the edge of perception. He saw worlds burning, gods screaming, a throne of cables and bones, a man entombed alive, fed by sacrifice. Not visions sent to him, memories leaking through him. The augurs spiked wildly. "Impossible," Mar whispered over the box. "He's not projecting. He's reflecting." Viraine stared. The warp recoiled. Not repelled, confused. Cal dropped to one knee, breath ragged. "I don't belong here," he said. The words were not an admission. They were a warning. Across the immaterium, something laughed. Not a sound, more a sensation, like amusement curling through poisoned silk. Tzeentch noticed first. Of course he did. The changer of ways felt Cal's presence like a knot in probability. An outcome that should not exist, a thread that refused to fray. Futures bent around him. Schemes failed to account for him. Destiny hiccuped. That was intolerable. In the eye of terror, cult prophets fell to their knees, screaming of a false sun. Demons recoiled when scrying spells brushed Cal's shadow. One lesser demon simply unraveled, unable to reconcile its nature with a being that broke rules it had never questioned. Khorne did not care. Yet. Slaanesh felt curiosity, dangerous, intimate curiosity, had a soul that would not burn brighter under temptation. Nurgle frowned. And somewhere deeper still, older than the gods of chaos themselves, the warp shifted. Because Cal was not aligned. Not to order, not to chaos. He was something else. Back on Hydra's Prime, the interrogation chamber went dark as power surged. Viraine steadied herself as warning glyphs flared red. "Report!" she barked. Astropath screamed. The warp was reacting, not to Cal's fear or rage, but to his refusal. Refusal to dominate, refusal to corrupt, refusal to kneel. Viraine understood then this was not a weapon. This was a problem. And problems in the Imperium were solved one of two ways: control or annihilation. She looked at Cal, still kneeling, still human, still refusing to become what the galaxy demanded. And for the first time in centuries, an Inquisitor felt something dangerously close to doubt. Because if Cal was allowed to exist, then the Imperium might have to answer a question it had avoided for 10,000 years. What if the universe does not require cruelty to survive? The warp had names for everything. That was its nature. Every thought, every emotion, every act of cruelty or devotion carved ripples into the immaterium, shaping it into something vast and screaming and familiar to those who lived too long staring into its reflection. Rage birthed Khorne. Decay fed Nurgle. Desire sang to Slaanesh. Hope, twisted, desperate hope, belonged to Tzeentch. The warp understood humanity. That was why it could devour it so easily. Cal did not belong. This realization did not arrive as a revelation, but as a growing discomfort, spreading across the immaterium like a bruise. Astropaths across the sector began reporting the same phenomenon. Transmissions slipped when routed near Hydra's Prime. Visions lost coherence. Prophetic dreams stalled, looping back on themselves like broken cogitators. The warp did not scream. It hesitated. Inquisitor Cardinal Viraine read the reports with mounting unease. Silence in the warp was unnatural. Even null zones had a presence, a pressure, a void-shaped absence that could be mapped and weaponized. Cal left nothing. No echo, no reflection, no hunger. The immaterium behaved as though he were a question written in a language it could not parse, which meant chaos could not ignore him. The first attempt came subtly. A cult on Hydra's Prime, long dormant, embedded among manufactorum workers, received visions of a golden false emperor, a radiant deceiver sent to undermine the true gods. They rose in a single night, chanting hymns warped by madness, convinced they were striking a blow for chaos undivided. Cal found them before the Arbites did. He did not sense their corruption the way a psyker might. He saw it in their fear, their desperation, the way belief had twisted into something sharp and self-destructive. When they attacked, rusted blades, improvised explosives, wild-eyed devotion, he disarmed them without killing a single one. He broke weapons. He shattered restraints. He carried the wounded to safety. And that, more than violence, enraged the warp. The cult's demon patron, a lesser entity, barely coherent, attempted manifestation as Cal stood amid the aftermath. Reality thinned. The air tasted of copper and rot. Symbols burned themselves into stone. Cal turned. He felt it then. Not kryptonite, not pain, but wrongness. The warp pressed against him like cold oil, trying to define him, trying to slot him into its taxonomy of gods and monsters. He felt its logic clawing at his thoughts. Choose rage, choose domination, choose despair. He did not resist with force. He refused with certainty. The demon screamed as it emerged half-formed, its shape stuttering, limbs misaligning, as if the universe itself rejected the idea of its existence near him. Cal stepped forward, not to strike, but to be present. The entity unraveled, not banished, not destroyed, unmade. The warp recoiled violently, snapping back into itself like a wounded beast. Across the sector, demons howled. Sorcerers clutched their heads as carefully constructed rituals collapsed into ash. 1,000 Suns Coven, attempting scrying, lost 3 members to spontaneous neural overload, their minds unable to process a future where Cal's presence existed. This was unprecedented. Cal was not anti-chaos in the Emperor's way. Burning, dominating, enforcing order through endless sacrifice. He was something worse. He was incompatible. Viraine watched the reports stack higher. "Can he be corrupted?" one of her advisors asked. "No," she replied. "Then can he be controlled?" She paused. "No." That left only one conclusion. "If he spreads," she said quietly, "he destabilizes everything." The Imperium's cruelty depended on inevitability. Chaos's power depended on emotional excess. Cal offered an alternative neither side could metabolize. Hope without chains, strength without worship, power without appetite. The galaxy had no slot for that. And so the pressure began to build. Cal felt it before anyone told him. Not as an attack, as loneliness. The more lives he saved, the quieter the warp became around him, and the louder the galaxy's response grew. Ecclesiarchy's sermons twisted his image into parable. Some declared him an angel of the Emperor. Others branded him a test, a trial meant to expose heresy. Both interpretations missed the point. Cal did not want belief. He wanted people to live, but belief was gravity in this universe. Wherever he went, crowds formed. Fear followed. Reverence crept in like mold. Guardsmen knelt when he landed. Civilians whispered prayers he did not recognize. Children reached for him, with eyes full of expectation he had no right to fulfill. Each time it happened, something in him tightened. He remembered another world, another sky, parents whose faces were fading like old photographs. He had been raised to inspire hope. He had not been raised to replace it. The Imperium noticed the pattern too. Viraine convened a closed council, Inquisition, Ecclesiarchy, Mechanicus. No record, no witnesses. He destabilizes morale structures, an ecclesiarch argued. Faith redirected is faith corrupted. He violates physical law, Amagos countered. His biology is a relic-level asset. He incites chaos reaction, Viraine finished, which means he matters. They debated solutions. Weaponization was proposed and dismissed. Cal could not be aimed without becoming what he refused to be. Containment was discussed and rejected. No prison built by the Imperium could hold him unless he chose to stay. Extermination was raised. Silence followed, because even the Inquisition understood what killing him would mean. Cal was no demon, no Xenos, no psyker. He was proof. Proof that the universe did not require the Imperium's brutality. Destroying that proof would be instructive. It would teach the galaxy a lesson, but it would also confirm his meaning. Viraine dismissed the council. She needed time. Chaos did not give her any. A warp breach tore open above Hydra's prime without warning. A raw, screaming wound that ignored normal immaterium physics. Demonic legions surged through, not to conquer, but to test. Cal rose to meet them. This time, the warp fought differently. Illusions, false futures, echoes of despair. Cal saw visions of humanity annihilated because he hesitated, worlds burning because he refused to rule, children dying because he would not become a god. For the first time since arriving in this universe, Cal faltered. Not because the visions were persuasive, because they were possible. He destroyed the breach eventually, not with violence, but by forcing reality back into coherence through sheer, stubborn presence. But when it was over, he knelt amid the ruins, breath shaking. Saving everyone was impossible. That truth hurt more here than it ever had before. A space marine, Black Templar, armor scarred, approached him cautiously afterward. "You could lead us," the warrior said. "End this war." Cal looked at the towering knight of faith and iron. "And replace it with what?" he asked. The marine had no answer. That was the problem. Deep within the warp, the gods adjusted. Tzeentch wove futures around Cal and found them tearing apart. Khorne's servants tested him with endless battle and found no escalation, no spiral into bloodlust. Slaanesh whispered temptation and received silence in return. Nurgle extended his gifts and felt nothing. Cal was not rejecting them. He was ignoring the premise that they mattered. That was intolerable. The warp escalated from manipulation to definition. A greater entity manifested, something ancient, composite, fed by belief across millennia. It did not attack Hydra's Prime directly. It spoke, not with words, with meaning. It tried to assign Cal a role. Liberator, tyrant, martyr, destroyer, savior. Each label slid off him like rain. Cal floated in the void above the world as the entity pressed closer, reality bending under the weight of divine attention. He felt its enormity then. Not fear, but pressure, like standing beneath a collapsing sky. "You must be something," the warp demanded. Cal closed his eyes. "I already am," he said. The statement was not defiance. It was identity. The entity fractured, not slain, invalidated. For the first time since the war in heaven, something in the warp experienced an outcome it could not metabolize. Across the galaxy, Psychers screamed as prophecy went dark in 1,000 futures. Inquisitor Viraine felt it. She understood the truth then, fully and finally. Cal was not a god. He was worse. He was a limit, a boundary the universe had forgotten it needed. She issued her final report to Terra under triple seal. Recommendation: do not elevate, do not destroy, observe at all costs. If he leaves the Imperium, let him. If he stays, pray he never decides we are wrong. On Hydra's Prime, Cal stood alone on a ruined spire as dawn broke through smoke for the first time in living memory. He did not know what he would do next, only what he would not become. And somewhere far beyond, stars and thrones and screaming gods, the universe watched, silent, uncertain, because for the first time in uncounted ages, the game had encountered a player who refused to play. The Imperium of Man was not built on truth. It was built on continuity. Every institution, from the Administratum to the Ecclesiarchy to the Inquisition itself, existed for a single overriding purpose: ensure that tomorrow looked enough like yesterday, that humanity could survive another night. Innovation was dangerous. Moral evolution was heresy. Stability was sacred. Cal shattered none of that directly, which was why he was so dangerous. The fracture began quietly. On Hydra's Prime, guardsmen started hesitating before firing. Not in battle, that would have been treasonous, but afterward during sweeps, during purges, during the necessary unglamorous work of the Imperium. Civilians who should have been processed were instead released. Entire hab blocks went missing from official tallies. At first it was blamed on fatigue, then on corruption, then on chaos. But the pattern persisted. Men and women who had seen Cal, who had watched him lift, collapsed Pharaoh-crete without killing the trapped beneath, who had seen him disable Tyranids without hatred, who had heard him speak without command, were no longer obeying automatically. They still fought. They still bled. But they began to ask themselves a forbidden question. If this is possible, why haven't we been doing it? That question spread faster than any plague. Commissars reported disciplinary actions rising by nearly 40%. Executions followed. Public examples were made. The ecclesiarchy responded with sermons emphasizing that mercy without authorization was rebellion, that compassion unguided by doctrine was the first step toward damnation. It worked, until it didn't. Because Cal never told anyone to disobey. He never preached. He never recruited. He simply acted differently. And difference, once seen, could not be unseen. The Inquisition recognized the danger immediately. Inquisitor Cardinal Virain convened an emergency conclave under a sealed astropathic silence. Representatives from multiple ordos attended, along with observers from the Mechanicus and Ecclesiarchy. The question was no longer whether Cal was a threat. The question was what kind. "He's not inciting rebellion," argued an Ordo Hereticus lord. "There are no manifestos, no leaders." "That's worse," replied Virain. "Rebellions can be crushed. Ideas that don't know they're ideas metastasize." Imagos Dominus projected a hololithic analysis. Behavioral deviation correlates strongly with proximity exposure. Soldiers who have seen the anomaly demonstrate increased moral hesitation. Moral hesitation, an ecclesiarch spat. "Say what it is. Weakness." Virain shook her head. "No, weakness is predictable. This is comparison." She brought up a single frame of footage. Cal standing amid rubble, turning away from kneeling civilians. "He doesn't want followers," she continued. "That makes him uncontrollable. And the Imperium cannot survive a moral alternative that refuses hierarchy." The word alternative hung in the air like poison. "Then eliminate him," someone said quietly. Virain closed her eyes. "You can't kill a symbol after it's been witnessed," she said. "Only validated." Silence followed. Somewhere, far above Hydra's prime, a Black Templar's strike cruiser altered course without orders. Cal felt the shift long before it reached him. Not as hostility, as tension. He moved across Hydra's prime now, without interference. Not because he was free, but because every faction was watching, calculating, deciding whether the risk of acting outweighed the cost of waiting. That indecision saved lives, and cost something else. He began encountering people who wanted answers. A guardsman approached him one night after a battle, helmet under his arm, hands shaking. "My unit was ordered to shell a refugee transit," the man said. "They said it was compromised. It wasn't. I saw you pull children out of the wreckage." Cal listened. "I didn't fire," the guardsman continued. "They executed my sergeant for hesitating. They haven't noticed me yet." He swallowed. "Was I wrong?" Cal felt the weight of the question settle on him like gravity. "No," he said carefully. "But you're in danger now." The guardsman nodded. "I know." That was happening more often. People were choosing, and the Imperium had never tolerated choice well. The Ecclesiarchy declared the doctrine of singular divinity within the month. It was not new theology. Nothing in the Imperium truly was. but it was emphasized with unusual fervor. Sermons grew sharper. Language shifted. Where Cal had once been referred to obliquely as a test, he was now explicitly framed as a heresy without intent. The most dangerous kind. Shrines were defaced overnight, some vandalized with crude depictions of a sun crossed out, others adorned with offerings left anonymously. In several hives, unauthorized prayers appeared, asking not for salvation, but for restraint. The ecclesiarchy responded with fire. Public burnings returned in force. The Imperium always escalated vertically. Meanwhile, the Adeptus Mechanicus fractured in subtler ways. Officially, Cal was designated an anomalous biological relic. Unofficially, tech priests began arguing over whether his existence represented a lost standard template construct of organic optimization, a proof that humanity had once engineered itself beyond current limits. That idea was dangerous. If Cal was not divine, if he was achievable, then the Emperor was no longer singular. And if the Emperor was not singular, the Imperium's entire metaphysical justification collapsed. Virain intercepted a sealed transmission from Mars recommending Cal's capture for indefinite analysis. She deleted it. The Space Marines were next. Not in open revolt, that would have been obvious, but in doctrinal tension. Chapters with strong faith traditions reacted violently to Cal's presence, declaring him a blasphemous echo. Others, especially those who had fought beside him, remained silent. Silence among Astartes was not neutrality, it was deliberation. Cal himself became aware of the schism during a joint operation against a chaos incursion. Two Imperial forces arrived simultaneously, one Astra Militarum regiment, one Space Marine strike force. They did not coordinate. Orders conflicted, lines crossed. Bolter fire almost erupted, not against chaos, but each other. Cal intervened. He did not command. He stood between them. Weapons tracked him instinctively, then lowered. A Space Marine captain stepped forward, helm mag locked to his armor. "You're the reason this is happening," the Marine said. Not accusatory, observational. Cal nodded. "Then I should leave." The Marine studied him for a long moment. "If you do," he said, "they'll kill each other, trying to decide what you meant." That truth hurt more than any blow. Cal realized then that his presence had become a catalyst, whether he wanted it or not. The Imperium was not built to absorb moral ambiguity. Remove the structure, and the weight collapsed inward. Virain watched all of this with growing certainty. She understood the shape of what was coming. Not rebellion, fragmentation. The Imperium would not rise against Terra. It would simply stop agreeing with itself. That was how empires died. The order came from Terra, encoded in the highest cipher Virain had ever seen. It was not a command. It was a verdict. Asset designation revoked. Anomaly reclassified as existential destabilization vector. Authorization granted for extreme sanction. The words were clinical. The implication was annihilation. Virain stared at the transmission for a long time. She had served the Inquisition her entire life. She had condemned worlds. She had signed exterminatus orders, knowing billions would die screaming. This felt different. Because Cal was not an enemy. He was a mirror. She summoned him. Not to a chamber. To a balcony overlooking Hydra's prime at dusk. The sky was clearing for the first time in generations. The sun, weak, distant, cast pale light through thinning smog. "They're going to try to kill you," Virain said without preamble. Cal absorbed that quietly. "I know." "They will fail," she continued, "but they will keep trying, and every attempt will tear the Imperium further apart." Cal closed his eyes. "I never wanted this." No, Viren agreed. You wanted to help. That's why this is unforgivable. She turned to face him fully. You are forcing the Imperium to confront a truth it cannot survive. That cruelty is a choice, not a necessity. Cal looked at the world below, at lives continuing despite everything. What are my options? He asked. Viren hesitated. For the Imperium? She said. You have none. For humanity? She met his gaze. Leave. The word echoed like a gunshot. If you remain, she continued, you become a banner whether you want it or not. If you leave, you become a question. Questions can be buried. Cal considered that. Leaving meant abandoning worlds still burning. Letting the Imperium remain what it was, accepting limits he hated. Staying meant war, not with chaos, with belief. He understood then what the warp had tried to show. Him, not futures where he ruled, but futures where his refusal broke empires. I won't rule them, he said softly. And you won't save them all, Viren replied. No, Cal agreed. But I won't become what they need me to be, just to justify what they already are. He stepped to the edge of the balcony. Below, Hydra's prime glowed faintly with lights that should not exist. Places people had rebuilt because they believed tomorrow mattered. Cal turned back once. I'll help where I can, he said. But I won't let myself become an excuse. Then he rose into the sky, not like a god ascending, but like a man choosing distance. Viren watched him vanish into the thinning clouds. She sent one final message to Terra. He has left Imperial jurisdiction. If you pursue him, you will prove his point. She did not expect them to listen. But for the first time in 10,000 years, the Imperium had encountered something it could not conquer, corrupt, or canonize, a choice. And choices, once seen, could not be unmade. Cal left Hydra's prime without fanfare. No proclamation, no vow, no goodbye to the crowds who had begun whispering prayers shaped around his silhouette. The last thing he did before rising into the thinning clouds was carry a wounded guardsman out of a burning hab stack and set him down beside an exhausted medica unit. Then he was gone. To the Imperium, that absence became a wound. Not because they missed him. Institutions did not miss. But because a thing that had been seen was now uncontained, and that violated the Imperium's deepest instinct. To put every anomaly in a box, every question beneath a seal, every miracle under a chain. The old reflex engaged. Across the sector, astropathic choirs transmitted contradictory orders. Navy patrols began hunting for an unidentified airborne asset. The ecclesiarchy declared new litanies condemning false suns. The Mechanicus dispatched exploratory fleets under the guise of salvage operations, each one carrying seals, cogitators filled with Cal's biometrics and predictive models. And the Inquisition? The Inquisition did what it always did when faced with something it could not neatly categorize. It split into factions. There were those who wanted him dead. Not out of hatred, but out of fear that the Imperium's fragile moral architecture would collapse if a viable alternative to sanctioned brutality walked freely among Imperial worlds. There were those who wanted him chained, hypothesizing that if he could be contained, he could be repurposed as a deterrent weapon against Xenos and chaos. There were those who wanted him canonized, because if the Imperium could claim him as the Emperor's will, then his existence could be made safe again. A miracle doesn't destabilize doctrine if doctrine owns it. And there was Viren. She wanted him distant, not because she had grown fond of him, not because she trusted him as a friend, but because she understood something the others did not. Cal's power was not his strength. It was his refusal. A refusal could not be harnessed, only provoked. Cal drifted through the void without a ship, the stars sliding past like cold embers. He listened, because he could. Vox signals, distress calls, the distant murmur of human suffering woven through a million frequencies. The galaxy was a choir of pain. He could not unhear it. So he chose targets the Imperium would never prioritize. Outlying transport lanes where pirates preyed on refugees. Mining settlements abandoned by administratum logistics. Frontier worlds where Xenos raids were acceptable losses in a ledger of endless war. He did not arrive like a conqueror. He arrived like weather. A sudden change in the sky. A quiet force that moved debris aside and lifted collapsed beams with careful hands. He repaired, he rescued, he carried the dying to those who might save them. And everywhere, the same thing happened. People began to hope. Not in the Emperor's distant, bureaucratized salvation. Hope as duty, hope as punishment, hope as a promise you earned through suffering. But hope as something immediate. Hope as something that looked you in the eyes and said, your life matters. That was the true contagion. On the world of Sarnax Vel, a munitions moon with a population of 30 million indentured workers, a coolant line ruptured deep in a forge complex. The explosion killed thousands in minutes. Firestorms raced through oxygen ducts. The overseers sealed the lower levels to preserve production capacity. Cal arrived while the alarms still screamed. He tore through bulkheads with controlled precision, not brute force. He carried people out in pairs, then in clusters, then by the dozens, moving faster than human eyes could track, yet gentle enough that no broken bones followed his urgency. When he reached the sealed doors and found them locked from above, he didn't rage. He flew straight up the shaft, emerged into the overseer chamber, and found a man in a robe of office standing over a console, sweating, trembling, repeating a single phrase like prayer. Acceptable losses, acceptable losses, acceptable. Cal put his hand on the console and crushed it into scrap. The overseer drew a pistol. Cal didn't move. Open them, he said. The overseer's lips curled back. You don't understand. I understand, Cal replied. His voice was not loud. It didn't need to be. You were taught to measure lives like fuel. He leaned closer, eyes steady. Stop! The doors opened. 10,000 workers survived who should have died unnamed. And afterward, those workers began leaving offerings at the melted console. Not because Cal asked, but because the human mind craved narrative and gratitude demanded a shape. It didn't take long for the ecclesiarchy to hear. It didn't take long for chaos to hear. And it didn't take long for the Imperium to decide that hope, unregulated, was a threat equivalent to invasion. A kill team was dispatched, not a standard one. An Ordo Malleus contingent with sanctioned psychers, null wards, and relic munitions designed to harm things that did not obey physical laws. Because the Imperium's greatest talent was improvising new kinds of cruelty and calling it pragmatism. They found Cal above Sarnax Vel, hovering in the upper atmosphere, watching the fires die down. His posture was weary. He didn't show it. But the rescue had cost him in a way no battlefield ever had. The constant exposure to need, the endless chorus of suffering, wore at him like sandpaper on stone. A gunship approached. Vox Broadcasting Authority. In the name of the God Emperor. Cal turned, already understanding. He didn't flee. He didn't strike. He simply waited. A psyker spoke a litany of binding. The air trembled with warp pressure. Reality curled like heat haze. Cal felt it. Magic, wrongness, a cold hand reaching for his mind. He clenched his jaw. This was not a physical attack. This was the galaxy attempting to force him into a role. And as the binding tightened, Cal realized the brutal truth. The Imperium would never stop hunting him. Not because he was doing harm, but because he proved harm was optional. He broke the binding not by overpowering it, but by centering himself, refusing the panic the warp fed on. The pressure slipped, unstable, unable to grip an emotional hook that wasn't there. He didn't destroy the gunship. He didn't kill the psyker. He gently disarmed the weapons, crushed the relic rounds into inert metal, and set the kill team down on the ground as if they were children caught doing something ugly. Then he left. And the kill team returned to their masters with a report that chilled even the Inquisition. He could have killed us. He chose not to. He does not hate us. He pities us. Pity was intolerable. The Imperium could survive hatred. It could survive fear. But pity implied that the Imperium's way of life wasn't heroic endurance. It was a self-inflicted wound. And empires do not forgive anyone who points at their wounds and calls them unnecessary. Chaos adapted the way it always did. Not by meeting strength with strength, but by exploiting the one thing even Cal could not solve: human nature. On the shrine world of Gethsemane 9, a civil war erupted without a single demon blade drawn. It began as rumor. A sun saint had been seen in the outer districts, healing the wounded, lifting rubble, refusing praise. Pilgrims poured into the streets, begging for miracles. Priests condemned them for blasphemy. Arbites cracked skulls. The crowd fought back. Soon, the planet was split. Not between Imperium and heretics, but between two kinds of believers. Those who believed suffering was holy, and those who believed suffering was avoidable. Tzeentch's influence twisted the situation with exquisite cruelty. False sightings multiplied. Illusory visions appeared in stained glass. Prophets emerged claiming Cal had blessed them, commanding rebellion. None of it was true. But truth was rarely the deciding factor in a faith war. Cal arrived because he heard the screams. He descended into a city that looked like Terra's ancient cathedrals, magnified to impossible scale. Streets of marble cracked by riot, incense smoke mixed with tear gas, hymnals burning beside corpses. The air vibrated with fanaticism. A mob saw him and surged forward. "Saint!" they cried. "Save us!" A counter-mob raised weapons. "Demon!" they screamed. "Kill it!" Cal stood between them, hands open. "I didn't come to be worshipped," he said. "I came because you're hurting each other." That should have been enough. In any sane world, it would have been. But this was the Imperium. A priest stepped forward, face streaked with ash, eyes fever bright. "If you will not accept the throne of divinity," the priest declared, "then you admit you are false." Cal felt a familiar, cold despair. The galaxy wanted him trapped in a binary: God or monster, savior or heretic, weapon or target. He took a slow breath. "I'm not here to rule you," he said. "I'm here to stop you from killing each other." A shot rang out. Not at Cal, at a child in the crowd. The child fell, and the world turned inside out. The mob screamed. Bolts flew, blades rose. Cal moved faster than sound, catching bodies before they hit the ground, disarming attackers, snapping gun barrels, redirecting grenades into empty air. He saved hundreds in seconds, and still, They kept trying to kill one another, because he could catch bullets. He could not catch beliefs. Then the warp opened like a grin. Not a massive breach, too obvious, too easily countered. Instead, a thin seam, a whisper-thin crack in the air above the cathedral's highest spire. A demon did not step through. A voice did. It spoke into the minds of the crowd in 1,000 languages at once. He will not save you. He cannot. He refuses to be what you need. Panic shifted into rage. People turned their fear into a weapon and aimed it at Cal. "Then what are you?" someone screamed. Cal froze for a heartbeat. Not because he didn't know, because the answer didn't matter here. A woman lunged at him with a knife, sobbing. "My son died praying. If you're real, why wasn't he saved?" Cal caught her wrist gently. He looked into her eyes and saw the raw, unbearable truth. Grief seeking a target. "I'm sorry," he whispered. The words hit like a bomb, because the Imperium didn't do sorry. It did glory. It did sacrifice. It did necessary losses. Apology was revolutionary, and chaos, seeing an opening, drove the blade deeper. Visions swept the crowd, images of Cal leaving worlds behind, of people dying because he refused to rule, of armies collapsing because he wouldn't become a king. The visions weren't lies. They were selective truths. Cal felt them too. He saw futures branching. In some, he accepted leadership and the Imperium stabilized under a new icon. Then slowly became an empire built around his authority. In others, he refused and watched humanity devour itself with or without him. There was no clean path. The crowd surged again. Cal didn't fight. He rose upward, floating above them, a quiet star above a sea of screaming humans. He wanted to speak, to calm them, to remind them they were more than their indoctrination. Then an ecclesiarch cannon on a nearby bastion fired. A shell, relic core, sanctified, etched with prayers, tore through the air toward him. The Imperium was escalating. The crowd watched, breath held, as if waiting for the universe to declare what Cal was. The shell struck his chest, exploded into white fire and warp static. Cal dropped. For a half second, he fell like any man. The crowd screamed. He hit the cathedral's roof hard enough to shatter stone, then pushed himself up, smoke curling from his cloak. His face was pale, his eyes unfocused for a heartbeat. Magic could hurt him. Not fatally, not easily, but enough. Enough that the Imperium believed it had found a lever, and chaos rejoiced. Not because Cal was wounded, but because the crowd saw it. The saint could bleed, and bleeding symbols become either martyrs or targets. Cal steadied himself, then looked down at the mobs still fighting. He realized, with a heavy clarity, that staying here would turn him into the center of the war. Whether he wanted it or not, every faction would escalate until the planet drowned in blood. So he did the only thing he could. He left. Not out of cowardice, out of refusal. He flew into the sky, away from the cathedral's shadow, away from the screaming prayers. Behind him, the civil war continued. And that was his first true defeat. Not because he had failed to win, because he had learned what the warp had been trying to teach him all along. You can save lives. You cannot save a civilization from its own chosen myths without becoming a myth yourself. Cal drifted for days through void and silence, letting starlight wash over him like cold rain. He could have crossed the segmentum in hours if he pushed himself, could have thrown himself from world to world, patching wounds in the galaxy like a medic on an infinite battlefield. He didn't. Because the deeper wound wasn't physical. It was philosophical. The Imperium had tried to force him into a role. Chaos had tried to force him into another. And the people, the ones he wanted to protect, had tried to force him into something else entirely. A guarantee, a certainty, a god. Cal couldn't be those things without dying as himself. He remembered the throne room on Hydra's Prime, the broken seat of domination, Virain's words, "If you stay, you become a banner." He had tried to leave quietly. The galaxy had followed anyway. When he finally descended again, it wasn't to a shrine world or a hive. It was to a dead rock with a forgotten station. A listening post from an older war, abandoned by the Navy after supplies ran out, and the administratum decided the numbers weren't worth the effort. A few hundred people still lived there, mostly scavengers, discharged soldiers, workers who had nowhere else to go. They didn't pray, they didn't riot. They looked at Cal's descent with wary eyes, weapons half raised, then lowered when they realized he wasn't coming to take anything. A woman approached him, older, face lined with hard survival. She didn't kneel. "You're the one they're talking about," she said. Cal nodded. "Are you going to save us?" she asked, not mocking, just tired. Cal swallowed. "I can help," he said, "but I can't promise more than that." The woman studied him, then nodded once, as if that was the first honest thing she'd heard in years. "Good," she said. "Promises are how we die out here." They brought him inside. For the first time in what felt like eternity, Cal sat at a table with people who did not look at him like an answer. They looked at him like a person. A strange one, yes, but not a doctrine. They ate ration paste and stale water. They talked about broken systems and old wars and the quiet terror of being forgotten. Cal listened. He fixed things. He repaired the station's failing power conduits. He stabilized the air scrubbers. He carried scrap metal with one hand and welded it with heat vision controlled to hair-thin precision. He worked without spectacle, without sermons. And for a brief time, it felt like something close to peace. Then the Imperium arrived. A frigate in low orbit, sigils masked but unmistakable in shape. An inquisitorial extraction team. Not to kill him this time, at least not openly, to offer terms. Virain herself did not come. Someone else did. Inquisitor Lord Rask, Ordo Hereticus, a man whose eyes looked like he had never permitted himself a single regret. He stepped into the station's main bay surrounded by stormtroopers, weapons ready but not raised. Cal met him alone. Rask spoke first. "You are causing instability." Cal didn't deny it. "I'm trying to reduce suffering." "Suffering is irrelevant," Rask said, as if stating a logistical truth. "The Imperium endures. Your presence introduces variables we cannot calculate." Cal's jaw tightened. "People aren't variables." Rask smiled faintly. "They are. That is the only way to manage trillions." He produced a data slate. "We offer you a role," he said. "Not worship, not a throne, a function." Cal felt the trap immediately. Rask continued, voice smooth. "You will act as a sanctioned instrument of the Imperium. You will appear where directed. You will destroy where commanded. You will become an icon of imperial inevitability. In return, we will reduce collateral. We will spare populations we would otherwise purge. You will save more lives than your wandering ever could." It was a beautiful lie. Not because it was false, because it was plausible. Cal could do it. He could be the Imperium's sword. He could end wars faster. He could break orc was and splinter Tyranid tendrils and crush chaos incursions before they metastasized. He could save millions. maybe billions. And all it would cost was himself. Because once he accepted their terms, he would validate the Imperium's moral structure. He would become proof that even compassion must kneel to hierarchy. That mercy could exist, but only when authorized. He would become what he feared most, not a tyrant, a justification. Cal looked past Rask at the station's inhabitants, watching through cracked viewports. They were afraid. Not of Cal, but of what the Imperium would do if he refused. Rask leaned closer. "You think you're above our wars?" he murmured. "But you're already in them. The only question is whether you'll be useful." Cal closed his eyes. In that darkness, he saw futures again. Some where he accepted and became a living banner of benevolent domination. Some where he refused, and the Imperium punished the station for harboring him. The warp waited, eager, hoping to see him crack. Cal opened his eyes. "No," he said. Rask's expression hardened instantly. "You doom them." Cal shook his head. "You doom them," he replied quietly. "You always did. You just want me to sign the order with my face." Rask raised a hand. Stormtroopers moved. Cal lifted his palm, not threatening, just present. And the weapons jammed, barrels bending as if embarrassed by their purpose. He didn't harm anyone. He simply made violence ineffective. Rask stared, furious. "You could end this galaxy's suffering if you would only accept necessity." Cal stepped forward, voice low. "Necessity is the word you use when you want cruelty to feel like physics." Then he did something the Imperium did not expect. He didn't attack. He didn't flee immediately. He turned to the station's inhabitants. "They'll come back," he told them. "Maybe worse." The woman from earlier stepped forward. "We know." Cal looked at her. "You can leave with me. I can take you somewhere safer." She shook her head. "No place is safe," she said. "But you showed us we can live without begging for permission to be human." Her words hit him like a weight. This was what hope did. Not solve everything, not end wars, but change the shape of what people believed was possible. Cal looked back at Rask. "You want me to be a weapon," he said. Rask's eyes narrowed. "I want you to be realistic." Cal's voice softened. "Hope isn't a weapon," he said. "It's a choice, and the Imperium could not contain a choice." Cal rose into the air, not triumphant, not divine, just determined. The station's people watched him go without kneeling. Rask watched him vanish and realized, with cold clarity, that the galaxy had just gained something more dangerous than a god. A man who would not become one. Somewhere far away, in the warp's churning darkness, laughter curdled into frustration. Because the oldest game in existence, domination, corruption, worship, had met a player who refused every victory that required him to lose himself. And that refusal, spreading quietly from world to world, would not end the long war. But it would do something the Imperium and Chaos feared even more. It would remind humanity that it could be otherwise.